Hola a todos, sean muy bienvenidos a este canal. Es un placer tenerlos aquí. Sean siempre muy bienvenidos. Ahora tendremos la reunión de este fin de semana. Gracias por estar con nosotros en esta transmisión y que siempre estemos juntos para aprender.
Thank you, Brother Watts, for that prayer. We have a very encouraging program as usual. What we can look forward to learning is to how to be truly wise and understanding. But the answer is not found in some university or some self-help book. Where is it found? We will learn about that in our meeting this evening. Many religious believers feel that images, figures, pictures of sentient beings should not be used in art. Is that what Deuteronomy 4:23 was talking about? We'll learn about that too. How can we make our ministry more enjoyable for us and for those who listen? That's something else we'll learn about. And finally, we will listen to an update from the governing body. Now moving into the Treasures from God's Word portion of our meeting, we're going to listen to our first speaker, Brother Robert Van Dudekam, and his talk is entitled, Jehovah's Laws Are Wise and Just. Please, Brother Van Dudekam.
The word law is not a popular word for many people today. And if we just consider that word within the context of man's laws, it might be easy to see why. But while human laws are intended to protect us, at times they are unjustly enforced to benefit the lawmakers, not the law keepers. But what a sharp contrast to Jehovah's laws. Jehovah's laws are always just, always wise, and they're always to our benefit. That does raise a couple of questions, though. What's required on our part to benefit from Jehovah's laws? And how do Jehovah's laws benefit us? To help us answer those questions, let's look within this week's Bible reading. Turn with me, please, to Deuteronomy chapter 4. And as you turn there, Deuteronomy chapter 4, let's consider the context. Moses has just finished reviewing with the nation of Israel how Jehovah had helped them since their departure from Egypt. He reminded them of the wisdom of following Jehovah's instructions and the sad consequences when they didn't. Now, because Moses wants the nation to succeed and to continue benefiting from Jehovah's blessings, he gives them the following guidance. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 4. And let's read together verses 5 through 8. Deuteronomy 4, 5 through 8. It says, See, I have taught you regulations and judicial decisions, just as Jehovah my God has commanded me, so that you may observe them in the land you will take possession of. You must carefully follow them, because this will show wisdom and understanding on your part before the peoples who will hear about all these regulations. And they will say, this great nation is undoubtedly a wise and understanding people. But for what great nation has God as near to it as Jehovah our God is to us whenever we call on him? And what great nation has righteous regulations and judicial decisions like this entire law that I am putting before you today? Did you notice the distinction that's made in these verses? In verse 5, Moses says that he had taught them Jehovah's regulations and judicial decisions. The nation knew what Jehovah required, but it wasn't enough just to know Jehovah's laws. It's not enough just to own a copy of the Bible or even be able to quote scriptures that we memorized. The key is in verse 6. There it says, we must carefully follow them. And that's the answer to one of our two questions. To see the benefit from Jehovah's laws, we need to carefully follow them. We need to be obedient to them. To illustrate the point, imagine you're driving and you approach an intersection where you know that there's a stop sign. Is that knowledge enough to prevent you from causing an accident? No, not unless you put that knowledge to use and actually stop. Knowing Jehovah's laws is a good start, but it's only when we follow or obey his laws that we, as verse 6 continues saying, show wisdom and understanding. How does it work? Well, obedience shows understanding because we recognize that Jehovah knows better than us. As Jeremiah 10:23 says, we can't direct our own steps. We acknowledge that Jehovah has the right to determine what's best for us, so we humbly follow his guidance. Obedience also shows wisdom, because wisdom, as used within the Bible, is the ability to put knowledge, in this case Jehovah's laws, and understanding, realizing that we can't direct our own steps, to good use. That's what we're doing when we're obedient and we choose to follow Jehovah's direction and laws instead of what we want. But now, what are some of the benefits, though, that come from our obedience? Well, notice the questions that were asked in verses 7 and 8. In verse 7, for what great nation has God as near to it as Jehovah our God is to us whenever we call on him? In verse 8, the question is, and what great nation has righteous regulations and judicial decisions like this entire law that I'm putting before you today? They're rhetorical questions. And the answer? It's obvious. Israel saw firsthand what kind of God Jehovah is. There's no one stronger than Jehovah. He rescued the Israelites from all their enemies. They were protected and blessed when they followed his direction. That statement still holds true today. There is no God like Jehovah. He blesses our obedience. Jehovah is a source of wisdom, and his laws serve to give us the best life possible. In fact, because Jehovah's laws are always wise and always just, when we faithfully follow what Jehovah says, one of the benefits is that we're able to enjoy a way of life that's far superior to that of the nations around us. The world is divided by selfishness, but Jehovah's people enjoy peace and unity. The world is still trying to figure out how to make a better future, but Jehovah's people, we know what the future holds. We already know what we're looking forward to enjoying very soon. And the blessings extend past Jehovah's people as a group. For example, think about it on a personal level. What blessings have you enjoyed because of following Jehovah's wise direction? How have you personally benefited from following the wise guidance that has been given to us about taking the necessary precautions during this pandemic? What blessings have you received by following Jehovah's guidelines on marrying only in the Lord or keeping your life simple? If we meditate on it, I'm sure that each of us can come up with a list of all the different blessings that we've enjoyed because of following Jehovah's wise directions. As a result, we're able to enjoy a life that's far superior than those who lack understanding and unwisely choose to ignore Jehovah's laws. Looking at the big picture, though, we're not the only ones that notice the difference. And going back to Deuteronomy chapter 4, in verse 6, it mentions that even those who aren't Jehovah's people yet, they would see the difference as well. And that leads to another benefit from our being obedient. We see a modern day example of this in the artwork found within this week's Life and Ministry Meeting workbook. In the photo at the top, in the first picture, a witness couple notices that the man's wallet has fallen out of his pocket. The man, he's distracted. He doesn't even realize that it happened. However, the witness couple isn't the only one to notice this, though. There in the back of the picture, we see a woman sitting at the table, and she also noticed what just happened. And now in the next photo, we see our brother putting into practice God's laws and principles. And unbeknown to him, the woman has been observing this entire sequence of events. What kind of effect do you think our brother's fine conduct has had on her? And this example is not unrealistic. There are many people who have been drawn to Jehovah's organization because of the fine conduct of those who follow Jehovah's direction. And the difference is night and day. As Deuteronomy 4:6 says, they've seen that we're a wise and understanding people because we follow Jehovah's laws. And that makes them want to learn about Jehovah as well. As we continue to diligently study Jehovah's word, we'll know what he requires of us. But that's just the first step. Understanding what Jehovah requires and then choosing to follow his direction, it shows wisdom on our part. And unlike man's laws, Deuteronomy 4:6-8 reminds us that following Jehovah's wise and just laws is always for our benefit. Our obedience leads to Jehovah's blessings and to us enjoying a life that's far superior than those around us. What's more is that our obedience and fine conduct, it can also draw others into Jehovah's organization as well.
Brother Van Dudecom, we appreciate that fine talk and your warm delivery. Now all of you dear friends are going to be able to give your comments, and we're looking forward to those. And to take the lead in this, we're going to ask Brother Levi Wilson to handle our spiritual gems from Deuteronomy chapters 3 and 4. Please, Brother Wilson.
Our Bible reading this week is taken from Deuteronomy 3, chapter 3 and 4, and it's full of spiritual gems that can help us draw closer to Jehovah. Let's start by considering the first gem in Deuteronomy 4 and verse 23, and let's see what we can glean from this scripture. Can we get a reader for this verse, please? Please, Sister Wright.
Verse 23, it says, "Be careful that you do not forget the covenant of Jehovah your God that he made with you, and do not make for yourself a carved image, the form of anything forbidden to you by Jehovah your God."
Thank you. So our first question is, what was the point of this prohibition? Sister Heron?
Well, this was a prohibition against making carved images for worship. And we can see this by looking at the context. In verse 19, it says, "Do not bow down to them and serve them." And in verse 24, it says, "For Jehovah your God is a God who requires exclusive devotion." So making carved images for worship was prohibited because it would divide the exclusive devotion that was due to Jehovah.
Excellent. Yeah, beautiful point. Also, Sister Bartlett, please.
But at the same time, Moses knew that the land the Israelites were about to occupy was full of idolatry. So it was very fitting that he give this stern warning against idol worship.
Excellent point. And Brother Wright.
And to further show that this was not a prohibition against all artistic images, carvings, 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 18 talks about the pomegranates that were in the Temple of Solomon, and verse 25 talks about the bulls that were holding up the molten sea in the Temple of Solomon. So it was not against all carvings, but just ones that were used to worship.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that point out. This will bring us to our next question, and we'd like to open it up to everyone now. What spiritual gems from this week's Bible reading would you like to share regarding Jehovah, the field ministry, or something else? Please, Brother Posados.
Deuteronomy chapter 3, verses 18 to 20 reminds us that the Israelite soldiers had to keep fighting alongside their brothers, even after receiving their portion of the land, until all the promised land was conquered. This meant that the soldiers had to be unselfish, patient, and persevere for many years, knowing that with Jehovah they had a sure victory and that their piece of land was waiting for them after the battle. These are the same qualities that help us today in our spiritual battle, showing unselfish love, being patient, and persevering, knowing that with Jehovah we have a sure victory and that after this wicked system ends, we have the new world waiting for us.
Beautiful point. Thank you. And Brother Hobkirk, please.
I appreciated the point in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verses 26 and verse 28. Here, this verse or these verses highlight Jehovah's wisdom in how to deal with disappointments, even strong counsel or discipline. See, after Jehovah says or strongly rebukes Moses for asking to see the good land, in verse 28, he right away gives Moses another assignment to commission, to encourage, and to strengthen Joshua. So instead of focusing on himself, you could say, or possibly a huge disappointment, the fact that he couldn't enter the promised land, he was told to focus on encouraging Joshua. So for us, instead of focusing on ourselves or what we may have lost or a disappointment, the best thing at times for us is to think of others, especially when it comes to encouraging and strengthening.
Very positive point. Thank you. And Sister Wilson, please.
Chapter 3, verses 18 through 20 also recounts how the wives stayed behind with the children and livestock while the valiant men crossed the Jordan to help their brothers complete the conquest of the promised land. So that could seem like a very vulnerable position to be in as a woman, as these wives left behind. So what would help them to get through this time with the least possible amount of anxiety? So it would be by remembering Jehovah's assurances to them to do not be afraid, and all the times that Jehovah had already protected them. So today, as we finish up life in these last days, we can lessen our anxiety by remembering how Jehovah's already cared for us and his loving assurance, do not be afraid.
Excellent point. Thank you very much. And Sister Hollis, please.
Last week, we read about how the 10 spies who made such a big issue about the strong and fortified cities in the promised land and the men of extraordinary size. But now in chapter 3, we read what really happened when they finally encountered them 40 years later. The battles only get a few sentences description. And verse 3 says, Jehovah gave all the people into our hand, and they captured all 60 of their cities. And the giant King Og only gets mentioned because of his coffin size. So why did they make such a big issue? Well, it was because of their lack of faith and trust in Jehovah, and it cost them and thousands of others their lives, and for nothing. So we want to always have faith and trust in Jehovah because it helps us to see the reality of a situation.
Yes, excellent point. Thank you very much. And Sister Bartlett, please.
In chapter 4, the matter of forgetfulness is addressed 3 times. In verses 9 and 23, the Israelites were told not to forget their miraculous deliverance from Egypt or the spectacular circumstances surrounding the inauguration of the law covenant. And then in verse 31, they were reassured that Jehovah would not forget the Abrahamic covenant. So if we are careful not to forget the amazing things that Jehovah has done for us in our personal lives and organizationally, our faith that Jehovah will not forget his promises to bless humankind will be sure.
Thank you. We won't forget your comment either. And Brother Watts, please.
In Deuteronomy chapter 3 and verse 26, Moses is talking, referring to why the Israelites, and he's talking to Jehovah personally. He says, but Jehovah was still furious with me because of you. So he's talking to the Israelites, but when this happened, Moses brought forth water out of that rock. So we can see that he used the word we, indicating it was him and Aaron that did this. But so he indicated a gross the Watchtower, July 2018, indicated it said a gross lack of respect for Jehovah, and the truth was because Jehovah provided the miracle. So Moses' actions here detracted from the honor that was due for Jehovah. So, and likewise, we need to show honor to whatever Jehovah gives us, and whatever privilege we have, we always make sure that honor goes to Jehovah.
Excellent comment. Thank you. And Sister Wright, please.
Yes, I really appreciated Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9. There Moses reminded the Israelites not only to not forget the things that their eyes have seen, and also to make them known to their sons and to their grandsons. So similarly, it reminded me that today, if we face discouragement or trials, if we continue to remember this precious truth that we found initially, meditate how Jehovah has time after time supported us in the past, and speak about the kingdom message to others, it could be faith strengthening during difficult times.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. And Brother Rashk.
I enjoyed Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19, where the Israelites are given a warning about not being seduced and bowing down to things like the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all the army of the heavens, because the nations around them were putting these things on high and worshiping them. Well, similarly today, we also have things that the world that we live in put on high, such as materialism, immorality through entertainment, and alternative lifestyles. So we don't want to be, like the scripture says, seduced and bow down and worship these things, but we want to remember who really deserves our worship, which of course is Jehovah.
Excellent point. Thank you. Brother Vorvis?
Yeah, I really liked Moses' words in chapter 4, verse 7, where he tells Israel, "For what great nation has gods as nearest to it as Jehovah our God is to us whenever we call on him?" And it made me think of the nations today. They have leaders, kings, presidents that people view as gods. They call on them, but these leaders are distant, inaccessible. Even if they do care about their people, how much different it is, though, than Jehovah our God. When we call to him, not only does he listen to us, but he answers us too. So, Jehovah our God is near to us, much different than the nations today.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. And Brother Heron?
I enjoyed the same scripture that Sister Wright mentioned, 4 verse 9, highlighting the need to make Jehovah's regulations, his commandments known to your sons and your grandsons. Now, of course, Jehovah's law was readily available to the younger generation, so they would know what Jehovah requires. But firsthand stories about Jehovah's support and help, they're just a little bit better. They impact and touch our heart just a little bit more. And so these true stories can be a benefit to young ones today too. So of course that's important for parents, but even if we're not a parent, we don't have children of our own, in the congregation, we can be involved in sharing our experiences with younger ones. If we'd had the opportunity to serve at Bethel, serve in a foreign language assignment, serve with LDC, share the excitement and joy that we had in those with these younger ones, and that can motivate them to continue serving Jehovah.
Excellent point. Good reminder for us all. And Brother Hollis, please.
I appreciate the point, the reminder to never forget what Jehovah's done for us. It's so easy to become distracted and forget what Jehovah expects of us. And so Moses made a good point. He made that clear in Deuteronomy 4:31. He said, "For Jehovah your God will not desert you or forget you." So Jehovah never does that. So then he said in verse 9, he said, "For us to just be careful and watch yourself closely so that you may not forget and depart in your heart from the things you've seen." So it's a good reminder to us.
Excellent point. Thank you. And we want to thank all of our commenters for their excellent preparation and comments. And now we'll turn the meeting back over to Brother Hollis.
Thank you, Brother Wilson, and thank all of you for your fine comments and good participation. Now we're going to listen to a portion of the Bible reading we've already discussed. So if you want to get your Bibles ready, you can open them to Deuteronomy chapter 3, and we'll be reading verses 1 through 13. And we're going to ask Brother Ethan Resk to handle this Bible reading for us. Please, Brother Resk.
Then we turned and went up by the way of Bashan. And Og, the king of Bashan, came out with all his people to meet us in battle at Edrei. So Jehovah said to me, "Do not be afraid of him, for I will give him and all his people and his land into your hand. And you will do to him just as you did to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon." So Jehovah our God also gave King Og of Bashan and all his people into our hand, and we kept striking him down until none of his people survived. We then captured all his cities. There was no town that we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All these cities were fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, along with a great number of rural towns. However, we devoted them to destruction, just as we had done to King Sihon of Heshbon, in devoting every city to destruction, including men, women, and children. And we took all the livestock and the spoil of the cities for ourselves. At that time, we seized the land of the 2 Amorite kings who were in the region of the Jordan, from the Arnon Valley as far as Mount Hermon, the mountain that the Sidonians used to call Syrian and the Amorites used to call Senir. All the cities of the tableland, all Gilead, and all Bashan as far as Salika and Edrei, the cities of the kingdom that belonged to Og in Bashan. For King Og of Bashan was the last remaining one of the Rephaim. His beer was made of iron, and it is still in Rabbah of the Ammonites. It is 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide by the standard cubit. At that time, we took possession of this land from Aroer, which is by the Arnon Valley, and half of the mountainous region of Gilead, and I have given its cities to the Reubenites and the Gadites. And the rest of Gilead and all Bashan of the kingdom of Og I have given to the half-tribe of Manasseh. All the region of Argob, which belongs to Bashan, was known as the land of the Rephaim.
Thank you, Brother Resk. Your reading was very good. It was confident. And what I liked is it wasn't dry. It could have been, but it wasn't, because you used modulation. Modulation is when you control or adjust something, when you lower your voice to a whisper to make it, for example, more dramatic, the reading. I noticed how you raised and lowered your voice to convey emotion. But you did so in a way that did not draw attention to yourself. Instead, made the point, the lesson, focused on the lesson from God's word. So thank you so much for your talk. Now we'll move into the next part of our meeting. Apply yourselves to the field ministry. And we're going to ask Brother Jesse Herron to handle the first talk for us in this part. It's entitled, "Increase Your Joy in the Ministry, Teach with Enthusiasm." Please, Brother Herron.
A well-known writer once said that nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. The point being, if we're enthusiastic about a task that we're given, then we're more easily going to be able to accomplish it. And what greater task could any of us have than helping someone come to know our Heavenly Father, Jehovah? If we take care of that assignment with enthusiasm, then it can help to capture the attention of our listeners. And it shows that we value this precious message that we have. Now, you may think, yeah, but I'm not a naturally enthusiastic person. Maybe you're shy or timid by nature, or maybe even your cultural background doesn't lend itself to one that naturally shows enthusiasm. Well, just like learning how to cook, learning how to draw, learning how to play an instrument, Learning the skill of enthusiasm, or rather the skill of enthusiasm, is something that can be learned. And we have an added help. Romans chapter 12 and verse 11 encourages us to be aglow with the Spirit. So Jehovah's Holy Spirit, when accomplishing the work he's given us, can help us to cultivate this beautiful quality of enthusiasm. But there are some practical steps that we can take to develop this quality. What are they? Well, first, think about the message, the importance of the message that we're declaring. Romans chapter 10 and verse 15, it says that we declare good news of good things. What's your favorite part of the message? Which of Jehovah's blessings in the New World do you most look forward to? Meditating on these wonderful things can help us to get excited about sharing it with others. And that excitement, that enthusiasm is going to naturally show through when we talk to others about this message. Consider the second thing, Romans chapter 10, verses 13 and 14. Those scriptures highlight the very basic truth that we all know, that everyone who calls on the name of Jehovah will be saved. But how will they call on him if there's not someone there to help them get to know him, right? Well, we need to meditate on the positive effect that this good news is going to have on our listeners. Think about the situation the world is in right now. Think about the trials and difficulties that our listeners may be facing. Certainly, this global pandemic is something that impacts everybody's life in some way, shape, or form. But other than that, maybe in our local area, there's other challenges that individuals might be dealing with. Thinking about these can help us to see that these individuals really need to hear the good news about good things that we have to declare. So if we do these two things, if we focus on our message and focus on our listeners, then we'll be able to naturally speak with zeal when we discuss these things with them. And you don't have to think that you need to put on a show of enthusiasm, that you need to ham it up, so to speak, to really increase it and make it yourself show as that level of enthusiasm. But instead, just be natural, be yourself. And your love for the message that Jehovah's given us and your love for people will shine through in the way you deliver your message to others. Let's take a look now at a video. We can catch up on the story of Nita and Jade, and we'll be able to notice what helped Nita to rekindle her enthusiasm. And when she did that, notice the positive effect that it had on Jade. Let's watch the video.
Nita, your phone buzzed.
It's Jade again. We've only studied once this month. She's so unscheduled.
Thought you said she was doing well.
She was. Now it's just, see you later.
How was your last study?
That's a very interesting question, but it's not really what we're talking about in this paragraph, is it? So let's just read the scripture, shall we? In my defense, I was annoyed. She never even attempts to explain why she cancels.
I understand. Really, I do. But if she's still open to studying, you can't let these little things drain your enthusiasm.
I know. I wish she was more structured. It's like she doesn't take anything seriously.
No study's perfect. She's making some effort. Focus on that. If anyone's enthusiasm is contagious, it's yours.
If I haven't mentioned it already, I really love our chats. And I appreciate all your questions.
Thanks. I know sometimes they're crazy.
No, you're a deep thinker. It's good. For both of us.
Okay, yeah, well, cool.
A very nice video that highlights the power of enthusiasm, isn't it? Let's take a look at a few questions that can help us to highlight some of the key points. The first question is, what dampened Nita's enthusiasm for her Bible study with Jade? How would you answer that question? Sister Van Dudicom.
We can see Nita was feeling frustrated, feeling that Jade was not taking her studies seriously, and this was affecting Nita's attitude.
Yes, exactly. And Brother Wright.
And Nita seemed to have her own ideas of how Jade should be acting or how her study should be progressing. And no person can necessarily meet up to our full expectations, and that was draining her enthusiasm.
It was an interesting point, wasn't it? Now let's look at that second question. What helped Nita to rekindle her enthusiasm? Brother Wilson.
She was able to reflect back on some of the positive points she had with her study, how well the study had gone with Jade, positive qualities that Jade had, and that helped her to be encouraged to pick that study back up.
Good, thank you. And Sister Hollis.
And her roommate helped her to see that she also made some mistakes. So it's better to look at the positive qualities.
Good. We need that little nudge every once in a while from our friends, don't we? Let's take a look then on that third question regarding those positive qualities. Why should we focus on the positive qualities of our listeners? Brother Posadas.
Well, because no study is perfect, so it can be easy to start to focus on the negative. But if we focus on the positive, then not only does it help rekindle our enthusiasm, but it also helps us value our student and the effort they make to study.
Very good. Thank you. Excellent comments. And so the last one there, what effect may our enthusiasm have on our Bible students and others? Sister Bartlett.
Enthusiasm is very contagious. It can make our listeners curious, make them wonder, why is she so excited? What's going on here? The listener becomes engaged. They want to listen to what we say, and they may well act on it.
Thank you. And we'll have one more comment from Sister Roscoe.
And in this case, too, Nita's enthusiasm showed Jade that she sincerely cared about her. And that's important for our students to know that we do really care about them.
Absolutely. That is important. Thank you so much, all of you, for those wonderful comments. You may have noticed, mentioned a couple times in the article in our meeting workbook, in your comments, and even mentioned in the video that we just saw too, the expression enthusiasm is contagious. If we work hard to develop this important quality, then that is going to naturally be reflected by our Bible students and others that we talk to. And as a result, we can perhaps have the wonderful prospect and hope of helping someone come to know our loving Heavenly Father, Jehovah. We'll turn the meeting back now to Brother Hollis.
Thank you, Brother Heron, for that excellent lesson on enthusiasm, which you yourself showed very well. Thank you. Now we're going to have another student talk that we're looking forward to. It's a Bible study. It will be handled by Sister Carolyn Waugh, and her assistant is Sister Courtney Roscoe. And the material is taken from the Enjoy Life Forever brochure, Lesson 1, Intro, and Points 1 and 2. Please, Sister Waugh, we're ready to listen to you.
Courtney, did you have any trouble downloading the magazine?
No, it was very user-friendly. No trouble at all.
Oh, good. You can't see his face. You can't see what he's doing, but do you think he looks sad or he looks happy?
I think he's smiling.
I think so too. After all, the title of the brochure is Enjoy Life Forever. And let me tell you briefly that each chapter is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is the main part. For example, how can the Bible help you? And the middle section includes a section called Dig Deeper, which includes scriptures, questions, and videos. We will practice in that section. And the last part is summary and review. We have goals and additional material. Do you have any questions?
No, not so far. Seems pretty
Okay.
straightforward.
Yes, and now an important section is how to find the Bible verses. I'll explain this in more depth when we get to a Bible verse. But the first part, A, is a Bible book, B is a chapter, and C is a verse. So that follows with each Bible verse will do. So let's get started. Section 1. Let's find out how the Bible can help you. Would you read the introductory paragraph?
Sure.
Thank you for reading. Did you think the Bible can help anyone you know?
You know, my mother always used to like to read the Bible.
Did she read to you when you were little?
Yeah, she did. She would read us stories like, I remember Daniel and the lions, and then Noah and the boat. And of course, she read to us about Jesus. But, you know, I really can't say I know the Bible very well.
Well, that's all right. Many people say that when they begin to study. But it's good to know you have some Bible knowledge. What are some questions that the Bible answered? Let's look at that paragraph's material. Would you like to read?
Yes.
Well, thank you. That covers a lot of ground. Do you think the Bible can answer these kinds of questions?
Well, I didn't used to think so. I mean, I thought it was always like full of sound bites. Love your neighbor, God is love, you know, catchy phrases, but I didn't think it would really explain anything.
Which is the question that troubles you the most?
Most? I guess why innocent people suffer so much.
Yes. Where is the justice? We get to that discussion quickly, and I think you'll find the answer very satisfying. But let's move on to question 2. How can the Bible help you to enjoy our daily life? Would you like to read it?
Okay.
Thank you. When you are reading, one phrase stands out. Teaches you how to be truly happy.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think I've learned how to be happy yet. I mean, I'm so stressed at work, and then I bring it home with me.
Well, would you look at the picture across the top of the page? What do you see?
Well, I see a cup of coffee, some earbuds, an iPad, a phone, a wallet, looks like maybe a map or something, and a Bible.
Yes. What do you think they have in common?
Well, I guess they can all help you find your way.
That's right. If the Bible is open. So remember, we started with a smiling traveler. He's on the journey. Would you like to read the message in the box?
Okay.
Thank you. Courtney, do you have a Bible?
Yeah, I do have one here. I got it.
Good. Then let's get started and dig deeper.
Thank you so much, sisters. Very fine job. We enjoyed that. Sister, while you were working on enthusiasm, and I really liked the kind of enthusiasm you manifest. I call it controlled, dignified enthusiasm, which is in harmony with your personality style, and we appreciate that. What we need to remember with enthusiasm is that it conveys excitement or interest, like when you're doing something that you really, really enjoy. And we could tell that you enjoyed conducting that Bible study, and you did a good job. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the next section of our meeting, Living as Christians. And to begin this section, let's sing together song number 68, Sowing Kingdom Seed. Our next part on the meeting I'll be handling. It's the 2021 Governing Body Update number 3. And now let's listen to the video and watch.
For this update, we're going to focus on our all-important disciple-making work. Despite the pandemic, the governing body continues to look for ways to make our ministry even more effective. How? By continuing to build on the direction provided at the 2017 annual meeting. At that meeting, the governing body announced organizational adjustments based on 1 Corinthians 9:26. That verse says, "Therefore, the way I am running is not aimlessly. The way I am aiming my blows is so as not to be striking the air." How do we make our blows count? We focus on what Acts 13:48 mentions, searching for those who are rightly disposed for everlasting life. How have we been helped to do that? Consider a few examples from the past year. We reviewed Watchtower study articles that focused on helping new ones progress to baptism and that reminded us to discontinue unproductive studies. The 2020 Regional Convention program devoted an entire day to the disciple-making work and to helping Bible students progress to baptism. Who could forget Nita and Jade? Our November campaign included a special effort to provide government officials with information about God's kingdom with the goal of reaching even more rightly disposed ones. And aren't we excited to use the new Bible study tool, Enjoy Life Forever, which features a more effective teaching style? But 2020 saw another significant effort to make our blows count. In June 2020, it was announced that all branches would evaluate their foreign language and indigenous language pre-groups, groups, and congregations. What was the reason for this evaluation? Notice what the governing body conveyed to the elders at that time. In recent years, Jehovah's people have responded to the call to expand their ministry by learning another language in order to reach honest-hearted ones, and publishers should be commended for their self-sacrificing efforts in this regard. Nevertheless, it has been noted that in some cases, pre-groups or groups show little evidence of growth, with few progressive Bible studies and few, if any, progressing to baptism. In harmony with 1 Corinthians 9:26, the governing body wants to be certain that we are making our blows count. How were these language groups and congregations evaluated? Notice what happened in the first century when Paul and his companions wanted to expand their ministry. Acts 16, 6 through 10 explains that they traveled many miles and made concerted efforts to preach in various territories. However, Jehovah, through his Holy Spirit, directed them to the right area. Let's read this at Acts 16:9. And during the night, a vision appeared to Paul. A Macedonian man was standing there urging him and saying, "Step over into Macedonia and help us." How did they respond? Verse 10 says, "As soon as he had seen the vision, we tried to go into Macedonia, drawing the conclusion that God had summoned us to declare the good news to them." When they discerned Jehovah's direction, the brothers immediately followed the leading of the Holy Spirit. Likewise, we follow the Spirit's lead. Of course, it's not provided through visions, but through evidence in the field. The recent evaluation showed that some foreign language and indigenous language groups and congregations had existed for years and yet had few or no publishers who were dependent on the language. In other cases, the territory was very scattered, so publishers and pioneers had to travel long distances to find someone who could speak the language. Despite all of this effort, there were few Bible studies and few interested ones, if any, who attended meetings. What was Jehovah's Spirit telling us? It would be better to use our efforts in other fields. Thus, such pre-groups, groups, and congregations were dissolved. Have you been personally impacted by this evaluation? If so, you're not alone. For example, as a result of the evaluation in just 16 branch territories, some 4,700 elders, 2,800 ministerial servants, and 11,000 regular pioneers have been made available to serve in other fields. At one time, we may have thought that the largest increase was taking place in foreign language or indigenous language fields, but as we've considered the matter more carefully, it seems that congregations in the main languages of many countries are experiencing the largest numbers of newly baptized disciples. So, if you're now returning to a congregation in one of the main languages of your country, remember that you are needed there. Many congregations are struggling to cover their large territories. In major cities, there may be millions of people to reach, but few publishers and pioneers available to preach. Many pioneers and publishers are finding progressive return visits and Bible studies in these fields. And think of how the congregations are being strengthened as so many mature ones join them. More appointed brothers are now available to help with shepherding, to deliver meeting parts, and to assist in many other ways. What practical blessings are resulting from this evaluation? Let's hear the thoughts of a few branch committee members.
Thanks to the wise direction of the governing body, the way we accomplish our ministry has improved. More publishers, qualified pioneers, and appointed brothers will be able to help rapidly other congregations and concentrate their efforts in the most productive language fields or fields with a greater potential.
This evaluation has allowed us to assign graduates from the School for Kingdom Evangelizers and special pioneers as well to more productive territories. But what we're hearing is that this has energized the ministry of these pioneers. In fact, many of them are conducting progressive Bible studies now.
None of us find adjustments easy, so it's been so encouraging to see how many have been willing to adapt to these changes, in fact embracing them. In one language field, some brothers were a little hesitant at first, but they were loyal, so of course they went along with the changes. Now the circuit overseer tells us that these ones have sent so many expressions of appreciation, thanking them for these loving adjustments.
Many learners have informed us that it has greatly reduced their stress level. This has allowed them now to be in a congregation that they can concentrate more on a productive ministry and take care of their own spirituality as well.
There's one brother who is learning another language, and he was in a congregation, and this changed from being a congregation to a group. And he said it's as if finally someone has just released the pressure valve.
Truly, our branch committee saw Jehovah's Spirit act and is convinced he blessed this evaluation.
What about our pioneers and publishers? Let's hear from some who have experienced these adjustments firsthand.
In the congregation where I'm serving now, in Portuguese, the territory is very productive. People are so receptive. I had the goal of starting one Bible study when I was in the foreign language group. When the adjustment came, in just a few weeks, I had 5 studies.
We would drive around for hours looking for just a few specific individuals. Now we just preach to people, and if we find foreign language speakers, we can still preach to them too. I have more joy in my ministry because I feel like I'm making good use of my time.
Well, we love being in foreign language, but realistically, it takes a lot of time. So we've really enjoyed having more time to prepare for our meeting parts, discuss the points in our application. It's been a really nice blessing.
I personally have really benefited from having the extra time just to spend on cultivating my relationship with Jehovah.
Something really interesting is what one brother said from another group. He said, okay, now I think I understand better the way that Jehovah does math. So instead of having 15 people learn a language to help one person, now just one person needs to learn a language to be able to benefit from entire congregation, 100 brothers or more.
The first concern that I think we all had was for those who depended on the language, that as it's turned out and as they've become part of the congregation, now they have an even bigger family of brothers and sisters who care about them.
So in our small congregation, the attendance to the memorial was usually just the publishers. Now being in this new congregation is very exciting because this year we had almost double the amount of the publishers in our congregation for the attendance this year. So that's very encouraging to see.
We feel that now we are putting our time and energy in a territory that is actually productive. And like 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 26 says, we feel like we are making our blows count.
If you're in the same situation as these publishers, what will you do now? Like Paul, we need to be willing to redirect our efforts based on the leadings of God's Spirit. Learning another language may be one way that we can expand our ministry, but it's not the only way. Where's the greatest need for preachers? Where is there evidence of growth? It might be in the field of your primary language. For practical advice on where your efforts and abilities are most needed, speak to your circuit overseer or write to your local branch office. Jehovah's organization is on the move, and it will not be stopped by the pandemic or anything else. Will this recent adjustment in priorities lead to even greater increases? Perhaps. It's too soon to say, but we're receiving positive reports. One branch reported that they've had 10 consecutive peaks in the number of publishers, and another branch said that the number of new regular pioneers and new Bible studies is growing at a pace never seen before. The governing body has every confidence that Jehovah will strengthen each of you so that we can truly make our blows count. We love all of you very much. From the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, this is JW Broadcasting.
What a privilege to have one of the governing body teach us directly. We want to commend all of you, dear Kingdom publishers, for all that you're doing to make your blows count in searching for those who are rightly disposed for everlasting life. Now we're going to move on to the next part of our meeting, the Congregation Bible Study. We're looking forward to hearing again your comments. If you want to get ready for that, you can open your Pure Worship of Jehovah Restored at Last books to chapter 9, entitled, I Will Give Them a Unified Heart. And Brother Sean Bartlett will conduct this, and Brother Gavin Wright will be the reader. Please, Brother Bartlett.
Well, it's an exciting chapter that we're in, especially if you were living during that time. And we see that this last week, we were started off with the theme of the chapter, which was restoration. And last week we had the first 3 of 5 restoration promises that Jehovah inspired Ezekiel to share with his fellow exiles. When we take a look at the box on 9A on page 100, when we look at these pictures, don't look at it from the outside. Look at it from as if you are part of the group. You're listening to Jehovah's prophet Ezekiel. You and your fellow captives are far, far away from your homeland. Basically have no intention of ever freeing you. But then you have Ezekiel. He comes along, Jehovah's prophet, and he starts to tell you that there's going to be a restoration. So these prophecies almost sound too good to be true. For example, the first one was worship free from idolatry. So here, that gives you really hope of once again being able to take part in clean worship, undefiled worship. The second prophecy was the return to a fertile homeland. Now that would be encouraging because there had been famine. But now the famine is gone. Jehovah would actually be taking care of you materially as well. And the third promise was acceptable offerings to Jehovah. Now that would be great comfort. For here you are, atonement for sins and remain close to Jehovah are possible again by having that acceptable offerings. Well, tonight we're going to consider the last 2 restoration promises. The faithful men take the lead and also united in worship at God's temple. Now, as we go through this information, let's do the same thing. Let's put ourselves right there. We're hearing these prophecies, and it's going to affect us personally. So we have Brother Wright. He's going to read for us, and he'll start with paragraph 18, please.
Promise 4. The sifting out of bad shepherds. A key reason why God's people went so wrong was the influence of corrupt men who took the lead. Jehovah promised to change that. Regarding such bad shepherds, he promised, I will dismiss them from feeding my sheep. I will rescue my sheep from their mouth. In contrast, Jehovah assured his faithful people, I will care for my sheep. How would he do so? He would use faithful, loyal men as shepherds.
So how would Jehovah shepherd his people? Sister Wilson, please.
At Ezekiel 34, verse 12, Jehovah said, I will care for my sheep, like a shepherd who has found his scattered sheep and is feeding them. So in order to do this, he would get rid of the bad shepherds, no longer allowing them, and he would use faithful, loyal men who would feel the same way about the sheep that Jehovah does, that he does about his sheep.
Okay, thank you. So what type of a emotion or feeling would you have when we were looking at that illustration and you see Jehovah's taking care of sifting out these bad ones? How would that make you feel if you were right there? Let's see, Brother Hubkirk.
Well, it would certainly instill confidence that Jehovah was keeping a close eye on his people, seeing how their welfare, their personal welfare was. And I appreciate that point at Ezekiel 34, where he said that he would rescue his sheep from their mouth. So even in a dire situation, it would build confidence that Jehovah would not leave us in the lurch, but he would take care of us.
Okay, very nice. And Sister Roscoe, please.
It also reminded me of the visions that we discussed earlier in the book, of the temple visions, where the older men were bowing down to the sun in the very courtyard of the temple, or they were worshiping creeping images in the dark within the temple. So to have this cleaned out, to have the proper people taking the lead, it really starts from the top down, and that would make such a difference for Jehovah's Pure Worship.
Oh, thank you. Let's go on to our fifth promise, paragraph 19, please.
Promise 5, unity among worshipers of Jehovah. Imagine how distressing it was for faithful worshipers to see disunity among God's people before the exile. Influenced by false prophets and corrupt shepherds, the people rebelled against the faithful prophets who represented Jehovah. The people even broke into opposing factions. Thus, one of the most appealing features of the restoration was the promise through Ezekiel, I will give them a unified heart, and I will put a new spirit in them. As long as the returning Jews remained in unity with Jehovah God and with one another, no opposer could defeat them. As a nation, they could once again bring glory to Jehovah instead of reproach and dishonor.
So what did Jehovah promise regarding unity? Sister Hollis, please.
Because of those false prophets and corrupt shepherds, the people lost their faith and trust in those taking the lead, so much so that even they distrusted even the faithful prophets and those who represented Jehovah. But what they needed was to have their faith and trust restored. And so Jehovah promised, I will give them a unified heart and I will put in them a new spirit.
Thank you. And Brother Watts.
And what a nice change we see in that picture. We know, as the sister brought out, there have been many visions that Ezekiel saw that were contrary to Jehovah's worship. But now in our picture, we see clear worship, like the sun coming up. It's like the more worship is being brought back, and the unity is being there. So these families headed up to the temple to worship again to Jehovah faithfully.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And Brother Roscoe.
We can see too that verse in Ezekiel 11:19, it says that they would have a unified heart and a new spirit. So who they were on the inside, their spirit, what motivated them, what pushed them to take action, that those were the things that would change, and that they would all have that same united spirit. And this would actually be not only a unity together, but a unity with Jehovah, which that would have a dramatic positive influence on the nation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sister Wright, please.
Yes, and along with that thought, Jehovah promises that as long as they remain united with him and his people with one another, no opposers could defeat them. So no enemies could really get to them. But instead, they would receive Jehovah's protection, and it will give glory to Jehovah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Brother Morves.
One of the things most refreshing for us in our Kingdom Halls today is the unity that we share. And it's hard to imagine what would it be like if each congregation was broken up into opposing factions. We can't even really imagine it if we try to think about it. But that was the state that these Israelites were in at the time. So I like how the paragraph just calls it one of the most appealing features of the restoration, because they could look forward to finally having that refreshing unity that we know today and we get to experience every time we meet together.
Thank you. Very nice comment. Good. Let's go on to paragraphs 20 and 21, please.
Were those 5 promises fulfilled on the Jews who returned from exile? We do well to remember the words of faithful Joshua of old. Not one word out of all the good promises that Jehovah your God has spoken to you has failed. They have all come true for you. Not one word of them has failed. So it was in Joshua's day. So it had to be in the days of the exiles who returned to their homeland. The Jews gave up idolatry and other disgusting practices of false religion that had alienated them from Jehovah. Against all likelihood, they resumed living in their homeland, cultivating it and enjoying productive lives there. One of the first things they did was to restore Jehovah's altar in Jerusalem and to make acceptable offerings there. Jehovah blessed them with fine spiritual shepherds, such men as the faithful priest and copyist Ezra, governors Nehemiah and Zerubbabel, high priest Joshua, and the courageous prophets Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. As long as the people remained responsive to spiritual direction and guidance, they enjoyed a unity unlike any they had known in a long, long time.
Now we'd like a volunteer to read Jeremiah 3:15, please. Who'd like to read that for us? Brother Van Dudekam.
And I will give you shepherds after my own heart, and they will feed you with knowledge and insight.
Thank you. Our question is, how were God's promises fulfilled on the returning exiles? Brother Wilson, please.
One of those promises was that they could return to that homeland and enjoy productive lives there, have plenty of food. And so that definitely happened. They were able to go back, cultivate the land, and it produced, as our one picture showed there, the men are gathering nice big clumps of grapes. It looks like it's producing quite well.
Thank you. Sister Bartlett.
And another fulfillment was in the fine spiritual shepherds that Jehovah raised up at that time. Mentions Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, High Priest Joshua, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. And we recognize many of those faithful shepherds even became Bible book writers.
Nice point. Thank you. And Sister Wilson, please.
And also one of the first things they did when they went back to their homeland was they built the altar to Jehovah so they could offer up burnt sacrifices. Even before they had the foundation of the temple laid, they made the altar. And this was so that they could have Jehovah's approval right away going back and find atonement for their sins and stay close to him again.
Okay, thank you. Brother Hubkirk.
And not only had they started worshiping Jehovah in an acceptable way, but they stopped doing what was wrong too. So they gave up idolatry and they stopped even following in these disgusting practices from the nations around them. So they were once again acceptable to Jehovah.
Okay, good. And Brother Posadas.
And as long as they remain responsive to spiritual direction, then they would also enjoy, Isaiah said in Isaiah 61, verse 3, that they will be called big trees of righteousness. And they will need big trees or tall trees. They grow together. They support each other. The root systems, they support each other. They even help the saplings growing up by providing shade. So it really highlights the unity that
Okay, thank you. Brother Van Budekamp.
And reviewing this all just builds our faith in Jehovah, our trust and confidence in him. And this is the reason we agree with Joshua in Joshua 23:14, where he says, not one word out of all the good promises that Jehovah your God has spoken to you has failed. They have all come true. Not one word of them has failed.
Very important for us to keep in mind even today. Very good. Now, let's go on to paragraph 22, please.
Without question, the initial fulfillment of Jehovah's restoration promises was encouraging. Still, that fulfillment was really only a foregleam of something much greater. How do we know that? Well, the promises were conditional. Jehovah would fulfill them only to the extent that the people remained obedient and responsive. In time, the Jews again became disobedient and rebellious. But as Joshua pointed out, Jehovah's word always comes true. So the promises would see a greater, more lasting fulfillment. Let us see how that came about.
So how do we know that the initial fulfillment of restoration prophecies was only a foregleam of something greater? Sister Van Dudekamp?
These promises were conditional. They were dependent on the people being obedient and remaining responsive to the direction of these fine spiritual shepherds. But sadly, as we know, the Israelites failed and they became rebellious. So they lost these promises that Jehovah had fulfilled for them initially.
Okay, thank you. And Brother Vorvez?
And for this pure worship to fizzle out again would indicate that Jehovah failed, but Jehovah does not fail. Going back to Joshua's words, not one word of what Jehovah has spoken has failed. So obviously it pointed to a greater fulfillment as well.
Thank you. It's always good for us to keep in mind Jehovah's done his part. Now it's up to us. We got to do our part. Keep up our side of the bargain. Okay, now when we take a look at up until this point in our discussion, it's been about the restoration, talking about the time period where Ezekiel's giving these promises. Now from here, we're going to shift focus a little bit. Now we're going to look at how these promises have a greater fulfillment and how that will apply to modern day times. We know that God's people went into captivity a long time ago. In our 2016 March Watchtower, there was a question for readers on that. And the point that was made, it says, given these facts, it becomes clear that God's people went into captivity to Babylon the Great with the growth of the apostasy of the 2nd century CE. So when were God's people set free from Babylon the Great? Well, our next 4 paragraphs are going to help us out with that. Help us with the modern day time markers that will determine when these things took place. So let's have paragraphs 23 and 24 under the subheading, I will take pleasure in you.
As students of the Bible, we know that this wicked system of things entered its final decline, its last days, in 1914. For servants of Jehovah, though, this is not an era of sad decline. In fact, the Bible indicates that 1914 saw the beginning of a thrilling period, the time of restoration of all things. How do we know that? Well, what happened in heaven in 1914? Jesus Christ was enthroned as the Messianic King. How is that event a restoration? Remember, Jehovah had promised King David that the kingship in his family line would endure forever. That kingship was interrupted in 607 BCE when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and ended the rule of the Davidic kings. As the Son of Man, Jesus was a descendant of David, and thus became the legal heir to the Davidic kingship. In 1914, when Jehovah granted Jesus the heavenly throne, the time of restoration of all things began. Now the way was open for Jehovah to use that perfect king to continue the work of restoration.
So when and how did the times of restoration of all things begin? Let's see. Sister Hollis, please.
Acts 3:21 there says that heaven must hold this one, or Jesus, within itself until the times of restoration of all things. So we know that Jesus became the king of the Messianic kingdom in 1914.
Okay, now, what is it that actually has happened since then, since that 1914? And what just a little more on the year 1914 and what took place? Let's see, Brother Heron.
Well, one thing we know took place many years ago was, of course, that Jehovah had promised King David that the kingship would come in his family line, that family line would endure forever. Well, that was interrupted in 607. So that needed to be restored. And that's why in 1914, when Jehovah granted Jesus the heavenly throne, that time of restoration began. So that kingship was returned to the legal heir of the Davidic line, and Jehovah could now use this perfect king to continue this work of restoration.
Okay, thank you. Brother Watts, please.
And when that happened, they lost the line of Jesus and the Davidic line that happened. But we know that Jehovah always maintains his purpose no matter what happens on the earth today. So even though something had been lost, we know that Jehovah has a plan always to restore that kingship in its proper degree.
Okay, thank you. And Brother Roscoe, please.
Until we can see that in 1914, the world really began to decline. Things got worse on the world scene. So it may not seem that that was the case. The kingship started, but really, as we can see, the kingship did start there. It wasn't an era of sad decline for Jehovah's people, but just for the satanic world that will be reaching its end.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good. Let's go on to paragraphs 25 and 26, please.
One of Christ's early actions as king was to join his Father in an inspection of the arrangement for pure worship on the earth. As Jesus had foretold in his illustration of the wheat and the weeds, it had long been impossible to distinguish wheat from weeds, genuine anointed Christians from impostors. Footnote reads, for example, we cannot confirm which of the reformers of the 16th century may have been anointed Christians. Returning. Now, though, the harvest season arrived in 1914, and the distinction was clear. For decades leading up to 1914, faithful Bible students had been exposing the gross errors of Christendom and were beginning to separate themselves from that corrupt organization. It was Jehovah's time to restore them fully. So, in early 1919, just a few years into the harvest season, God's people were set completely free from captivity in Babylon the Great. The exile was over. The restoration prophecies of Ezekiel began to see a fulfillment far greater than any that God's people had seen back in ancient times. Let us now consider how the 5 promises we have already examined have seen a greater fulfillment.
So here we have 2 questions. The first one, when did the long exile in Babylon the Great come to an end, and how do we know? And we can also tie in some comments from our box 9B. Sister Bartlett, please.
So while it's clear that Jesus began reigning as king in heaven in 1914, evidently it was not immediately that the great restoration began. Malachi indicated that there would be a time period when there would be a period of refining and testing. And the early history of Jehovah's organization gives evidence that there were disappointment, of course, when the anointed did not go up to heaven in 1914. Brother Russell died. There was an attack really on the leadership of the organization, to the point where the organization almost split in 1917. So at this point, God's people were not yet freed from Babylon the Great as of 1917.
Okay, thank you. And Brother Wilson, please.
And then our box brings out, following those points, 1919, things turned around tremendously. It seemed like everything was headed downhill, and yet there was this swift turnaround in 1919. So that is another indication marking this year as that special year.
Thank you. Okay, and Brother Hollis, please.
This clarified understanding helps us so much to understand many things, like it helps us to understand why in the Middle Ages we knew there were faithful ones, such as the reformers in the 16th century, but we can't say if they were of the anointed or not, because it wouldn't be clear until the time of the end exactly who the wheat were.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Sister Roscoe.
And some of the things that changed in 1919, the focus was really put on the ministry. It mentions the Awake magazine basically was released, the Bulletin, which was our meeting workbook now, but was Kingdom Ministry for many years, and then also an overseer assigned to help organize the ministry. So a big change and evidence that they were being released from Babylon the Great, because only Jehovah's people and only with Jehovah's blessing can the ministry really take place.
Okay, thank you. Let's take our big question. What began to see fulfillment in 1919 onward? Brother Rashek.
We begin to see that the promises that we've been seeing the initial fulfillment being fulfilled now at 1919 afterward, the greater fulfillment starts to take place, which we'll analyze next time.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah. And Sister Wilson.
And this is exciting for us because of where we are in the stream of time, and also because we know with Christ reigning, there will be no end to his kingdom. So there will be nothing that will stop any of these restoration prophecies from having their full wonderful fulfillment.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for all of your comments. We really appreciate it. We came from a long time back listening to those promises, and now brought us right to the time period that we're living in. Next week, we're going to see that there's even a greater fulfillment. And so that'll be something for us to look forward to for our next Congregation Bible study. Now we'll turn it back over to Brother Hollis.
Yes, thank you all for your fine comments. Well researched, very interesting. And thank you, Brothers Bartlett and Brother Wright, for conducting and reading. So we've learned this evening many things. We've learned that, for example, true wisdom and understanding comes from carefully obeying God's laws. We've also learned the importance of enthusiasm. It's contagious. Showing enthusiasm means that we speak with zeal, use natural gestures, and sincere facial expressions. We have a number of announcements this evening, so I'll begin to read these to you. The first is adjusted student assignments. As a reminder, the Enjoy Life Forever brochure will be featured in the Bible study student assignments beginning in June 2021. Since the material to be considered for these assignments does not appear in the Life and Ministry Meeting Workbook, please refer to the list of adjustments that the elders provided you. Next is annual items. Annual items for 2022 will be made available for downloading beginning in October of this year. Publishers who require hard copy editions may now request the following items: 2021 Watchtower and Awake bound volume, Examining the Scriptures Daily 2022, and the Watchtower Publications Index 2021. Additionally, requests may be submitted for Braille editions of Examining the Scriptures Daily. Bethel service, next announcement. Although circumstances related to the COVID-19 pandemic have limited the number of those who can be invited into Bethel service at this time, we are still interested in knowing who may be available to serve when it becomes possible to invite more volunteers. Therefore, baptized Christians 19 years of age or older who desire to pursue Bethel service or assist with theocratic construction projects on a part-time or full-time basis should speak to their congregation secretary to receive further instructions on submitting an application. Where possible, it is preferred that publishers who have access to the internet use the online applications features. Additionally, applicants should view the videos making yourself available for Bethel service and be honest in all things before submitting an application to their elders. Our next announcement is posting materials on websites and social media. While we may share information from the organization's websites by sending a link to individuals, we should not post on the internet any artwork, electronic publications, trademarks, music, photos, videos, or articles from our websites. This would include theocratic programs on jw.org or JW Stream, such as monthly broadcasts, congregation meetings, circuit assemblies, and conventions. If you have posted such material on any website or social media without permission, please remove it. More information on this topic can be found in the April 2018 issue of the Watchtower, pages 30-31, and on jw.org under Terms of Use. This announcement is COVID-19 restrictions. Many governmental public health authorities have stated that fully vaccinated people may have greater flexibility in their activities. These activities might include association with others, travel, and assembling for events. It is wise to keep updated on the local government requirements and to respect them. As mentioned in the video 2021 Governing Body Update number 4, Jehovah's Witnesses are not against vaccination. We view it as a personal decision for each Christian to make. In cooperation with recommendations from public health officials, many in our Bethel families have already chosen to be vaccinated. Medical studies have shown that those who are fully vaccinated have added protection against the virus. A person becomes fully vaccinated 2 weeks after receiving all required doses of a COVID-19 vaccine. Medical studies have also shown that those who choose not to be vaccinated should remain more cautious, since they are far more susceptible to the virus. All of you are to be warmly commended as you continue to show good judgment and to act in a way that demonstrates your respect for life. So to conclude our meeting, we will sing together song number 110, entitled The Joy of Jehovah, and then following our song, Brother Nathan Hobkirk